Hi, class. Sorry I've been away for the last week and a half. I've been hard at work grading the papers for my 4 classes. Um, so here I am. I'm back, and I want to record 3 short lectures for you, all about 6 to 8 minutes or so, on features of uh, the novel in general and Parable of the Sower specifically. And the first of these lectures, I think, will probably be the most interesting to you, which are to identify in our novels what I call thematic elements. Um, Sometimes you'll have a teacher, especially in high school, who asks you to identify the theme of a work of literature, in which case you give a large generalization about what the novel or the story or the poem sort of means in a very general sense. And thematic elements are different. They are identifiable, concrete, um, uh, sort of images or sort of significant ideas that we can pinpoint and say, yes, concretely those exist in the novel. The trick with it is, of course, what do you want to say about the significance of a particular thematic element? For example, one thing we might look for are recurring images, what are sometimes called leitmotifs, or just motifs that occur in the novel. For example, one of the first images we're introduced to in the novel is that of fire. And fire is something that seems destructive, that devours lives and communities and threatens Lauren's sense of safety. It makes her vulnerable. It threatens her autonomy, her ability to act as a free agent, because fire isn't something that she has control over, and especially given the the, the climate change in the novel, a deteriorating California that suffered, what is it, 6 years of drought. So we finally see this purifying rain. So fire might be an interesting motif, but only perhaps as it relates to another motif, such as walls, the walled community, which is eventually, of course, destroyed through what are they called? The paints, and their addiction to the drug pyro, and their wanting and seeming to get off on watching fire, watching things burn, watching people's lives being consumed in flames. So you could also look at what I think are some of the more interesting thematic elements, such as gender and gender roles in the novel. Lauren's father is very traditional. He sees things in kind of black and white, male, female, black, white, etc. While Lauren is sort of shaped by this notion of God being change, and thus things like gender are subject to change, mutation, hybridity, adaptation obviously is important. Specifically, we could look at, for example, the thematic elements surrounding Lauren's shifting gender roles and gender identity. She poses as a man when she goes out, and she moves between those poles of the male and the female. So we might look at her ability to adapt as something that runs counter to fire seeming all-consuming power. She wants to take back power through even her religious beliefs. Her religious beliefs. Earthseed is another powerful thematic element that runs throughout the novel. So, what I'm going to ask you to do in your second paper, which everyone's going to be writing on Parable of the Sower, is to gather together at least two significant thematic elements that interest you. That's the key. Is you find them significant. You thought they were interesting, that they shaped the meaning of the novel as you experienced reading it. So that's going to be your task for your next writing assignment, which is going to be due on Sunday, is to identify one thematic element that you think is particularly interesting or important. You can use one that I've just mentioned here. You can certainly take up something like the environment, ecology in the novel, race and racial identities and race conflict in the novel. You could look at class and certainly they're becoming a kind of ruling, owning class, even a slave-owning class. And then it's not just the 1% and the 99%, it's like the half of a half of a half of 1%, and everybody else. So those would all be, and God, there's tons of them. And I don't want my lecture here to limit the possibilities. So another element of your papers that I will be discussing a little bit more in my next lecture is going to be to think about how Octavia Butler's novel Parable of the Sower speaks to your generation, known as Gen Z, folks that are right now between the ages of about 12 and 25 or so. So in my next lecture, which is going to be on narrative structure, I'm going to ask you to think about how the way that the novel is set up with through the lens of a 15-year-old girl and her journal, which is the way that the novel first establishes a sense of place and time, and which are the two main characteristics of narrative structure. And again, I'll be talking about that in the next lecture. So be able to define and identify what this term thematic element means, and then think about what you want to explore in your first writing assignment. And I'll give you a template for that that relates to a specific thematic element that you want to examine and hopefully carry forward into your paper. Okay. I am putting online for you a couple of videos and readings based on Gen X. It could be on Gen X, my generation, and how it's sort of guided us into your generation, Gen Z. The quiz I'm going to be putting up is going to be on the opening chapters of Cormac McCarthy's The Road, which is the next the next novel you're going to be reading as you begin work on your Parable of the Sower papers. Okay, Dr. Masters out.